Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our participants today, and welcome to the new installment of ICSID's Investment Mediation Insights webinar series, and specifically to today's episode number 2, which focuses on mediating from the parties' perspectives. I see familiar faces and I see new friends on the list of participants, and I look forward to all of us gaining some more practical insights into investment mediation today. As you know, in 2022, ICSID's member states adopted the mediation rules, and there are two features that I would like to highlight today. One is that ICSID mediation is, unlike ICSID convention arbitration, not linked to any membership requirements or to nationality. The other aspect that is different in the mediation context is that a request for mediation does not necessarily need to contain an agreement to mediate. Parties may submit a request for mediation containing an offer to mediate, which we at the Secretariat would transmit, inviting the other party to respond to that offer. We have heard from Council and states that this has significantly shifted negotiations, and we wanted to just ensure to mention this at the outset. We have put some links to materials in the chat, and adding to that is our background paper on investment mediation, providing insights into how the process works and what's available, as well as our investment treaty analysis on mediation provisions, which we will touch upon in a bit. I am very fortunate to have today with me Eric Franco and Amal Bouchenaki. Amal is a partner at HSFK and has experience in a very wide range of investment dispute resolution procedures and practices in a number of regions around the world. Then we also have Eric Franco with us. Eric is equally widely versed in dispute resolution processes in the investment context, also including dispute boards, and Eric has served in-house counsel and in-house on the state side and will share his experiences with mediation today as well. One note on format before we jump in: we will structure this as an conversation amongst the three of us. For all our participants, please feel free to add any questions you may have into the chat, and then we will engage with these either at the end or in the course of the discussion. So with that, over to you, Eric and Amal. And I start with, how is mediation different from arbitration? Arbitration focuses on dispute resolution on the basis of the applicable law and a final decision by a tribunal. Mediation is a process exploring settlement. There's no requirement to settle, but parties commit to explore settlement. So what are differences? Eric, maybe you could start?
Of course, Frauke, many thanks for the introduction. It is my pleasure to share this webinar with Amal and you. Well, arbitration focuses on deciding which party's position is correct, while mediation temporarily sets aside the positions and focuses on the underlying interests to consider whether there is a way to satisfy the party's interest while avoiding a dispute. In mediation, parties retain control of their dispute. They are not constrained by the claims presented to a tribunal and have flexibility to consider the interests underlying the positions that would otherwise be reflected as claims. This would allow a wide range of options to settle that are not available in arbitration. Arbitration looks back in the past and what happened, whereas mediation is future-oriented, what parties desire to create. Arbitration focuses on solving a dispute. Mediation focuses on untangling a relationship. The mediator helps the parties to understand the other party's positions and realize the strengths and weaknesses, but the focus goes beyond, because the mediator helps the parties to explore the underlying interest in a way that is generally not possible when there is a dispute and no party wants to lose face, seem weak, or there is no proper space to explore anything beyond the dispute itself. This is done in a safe, confidential, and without prejudice space. When mediation is an option, thanks to a contractual clause or party agreement to mediate, that opportunity shall be properly seized. The mediator shall know the proper techniques to conduct the mediation, and the parties shall be advised appropriately and be prepared to take the most out of the opportunity. Unfortunately, mediation is often undertaken as a mini arbitration by professionals more familiar with arbitration, resulting in lost opportunities. So there are several differences between one and the other.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, and touching upon the profiles of mediators to ensure that the process remains true to itself, maybe we get to that. But Amal, what are your thoughts on mediation arbitration? What are main differences?
Maybe I'll just add to what Eric said, and maybe 2 points. One is mediation, because it's not constrained by the boundaries of an arbitral tribunal's jurisdiction. It can, when there is a complex dispute with multiple stakeholders, so for example, other shareholders of the investor who are not nationals of the protected investors, or local communities involved in what the dispute stems from. In those situations, the mediation process allows to encompass all stakeholders in the dispute resolution process, which is something that the arbitration by nature cannot do. The second point I would add is there is a flexibility in the type of remedies that you get through mediation that by definition, because sometimes, for example, treaties actually prescribe the type of remedies that you can seek. And also because we can see that the overwhelming majority of remedies that are obtained through investor-state arbitration are damages, monetary damages. That differs from what you could obtain through a mediation, because you can have a mediation that, say, provides for, or where the parties agree that the investor resumes their operation in the country, or get a different type of compensation that looks more like a commercial deal as opposed to a damages award.
And that is, often described sort of at the customizable outcomes that can take into account what the parties desire, and can be a new joint venture, as you said, or a different setup, or even an amicable withdrawal and
Exactly.
buying of shares. We have seen different aspects in practice.
Yeah.
Talking about mediator profiles, Eric, you touched upon it. What is it that one might want to seek? What are profiles of a mediator that would be helpful?
Well, in the first place, mediation requires techniques to work with the parties. So it's not something you can just do applying common sense. So there is a need to create a safe environment, explore the interests of the parties, and bring the parties closer. So these techniques must be known to the mediator. So proper training is a must. So that's in the first place. Then time is short to conduct a mediation. So the mediator does not have much time to learn about the issues involved, and the mediator must be able to read between the lines, anticipate internal dynamics within the parties, and identify the likely underlying interests. In this sense, the mediator's familiarity with the type of disputes and issues involved is a significant added value and often the key to a successful mediation. A diverse background, that is something that we've been talking a lot in the dispute resolution world in the last years, is essential, as it enables the mediator to gain a deeper understanding of what is happening or could be happening internally within the parties, beyond their stated intentions. Having had the experience of working in-house for a state and an investor as counsel and arbitrator, being familiar with the culture and language of the parties and so on, all these diverse aspects allow the mediator to reduce blind spots when helping the parties to explore their interests and try to find a way around the disputes, creatively and constructively.
A range of qualifications that go beyond and focus sort of on the negotiation character of mediation. Amal, do you have other aspects you'd like to add?
Yeah, maybe one aspect that trickles into a few type of criteria. So I think it's very important for the parties from the outset to have in mind that the mediators are not arbitrators. They are not decision makers. And so the qualities that you need to seek in a mediator are not necessarily the same qualities that you seek in an arbitrator. So their role in the mediation is really to facilitate. They're facilitators. They are. They have the possibility, as we see in most mediation rules, to have ex parte discussions with the parties, right, and to help the parties test the realism of their positions, how strong they are. And to do that, they need to have a sense of a practical understanding of what an investor-state dispute is, of what is feasible for a state and what isn't, what is feasible for a company and what isn't. To have that ability, and as Eric was saying, you know, sometimes because of these ex parte discussions that take place, you need to, it is better to be able for some parties to speak to the party representatives in their own language. So that can be a factor that you factor in your choice. And, you know, likewise, when a very specific, very specialized industry is at stake, sometimes it is necessary to look for someone who will have had that experience. Not always, because as we will discuss later on, you know, there are, again, we're not approaching mediation with substantive issues in mind. So it might not always be the case that you need a specialist of, say, financial transactions or LNG, or in the same way as sometimes you need for an arbitrator profile.
And you may involve experts in some way of the process. The mediator and parties could also discuss that, certainly in the negotiation as it becomes helpful. That's a good point you raised. Thank you. So moving from the comparison of arbitration and mediation, looking at mediation and direct negotiation. Why would we mediate, or what are the benefits and shortcomings of direct negotiations? Maybe we start there and we'll stay with you, Amal. Your thoughts?
Okay. Yeah, so look, I mean, direct negotiation, and certainly when we think about it, it's less costly. It's on its face, it's more direct. It's more, there's no process. So some parties are taken aback by the idea of involving the third party when they can sort of engage directly. And there are no institutional fees. They feel like it's going to be cheaper. They can have it done by their executives and then the state representatives, and so there are less costs involved. I think it can be a false impression, depending, right, because of the state and the investor at issue. But it can be a false impression because direct negotiations can be protracted because you don't easily get to the right counterpart to speak to someone who has the right decision-making power to enter into an agreement. And for a state particularly, it can be a very dangerous exposure for the state representatives to engage in direct negotiations unless they have a structure behind them that really guarantees their protection. It can be then dangerous for them, and therefore can at the end hinder the effectiveness of any direct talks that you have with a state.
Yeah, we'll look and maybe we touch upon the organizational aspects. What are, it's a broader picture. It's on the one hand process, but really structures that enable it. Eric, what are your thoughts on the shortcomings or benefits of direct negotiation? And then we'll move to mediation.
Well, really, direct negotiation is the basis for any settlement. So we should not forget that negotiation is an assisted way of negotiating, and that is the baseline. A channel of direct negotiation should always be open during any dispute resolution proceeding in order to have the possibility to settle the claim. If there's no channel for direct negotiation, there's very little possibilities of settling a claim. Most difference between the parties are resolved directly by them, and this is something that dispute resolution professionals might not notice, because dispute resolution professionals deal mainly with disputes that have escalated to arbitration or that are so entangled that are not being able to be solved by the parties. So many professionals that focus on arbitration or litigation just deal with that and don't realize that, in my opinion, around 98% of the times or 99% of the times, negotiation by the parties directly is effective. Negotiation is fast and inexpensive. The parties can generally explore their interests and find ways to overcome their difference directly. The cost, time, and reputational risk and other burdens that escalating the dispute to an arbitration justify trying all means available to try to solve the dispute as early as possible. And mediation is one of those mechanisms available within the ADR toolkit and can be effectively to help facilitate communication and understanding among the parties.
On the direct negotiation side, and so an open channel, and this is what our ICSID arbitration statistics show, that 30 to 40% always settle even after an arbitration started, and many of these direct negotiation. So what is the value added that mediation actually brings over direct negotiation, Eric?
Mediation provides a safe, confidential, and without prejudice space to explore interests in a more comprehensive way than direct negotiation. And often parties hesitate to express their true thoughts in negotiations, but a mediator can facilitate more transparent communication by filtering and shaping the message directly or indirectly. Mediation allows exploring settlement alternatives without losing face or fear of appearing to have a weak case. Mediation provides an excuse for the parties to involve higher rank managers, officers that would otherwise be more difficult to engage in direct negotiations. In my experience, when there is a dispute, and for example, you go to the CEO of the company and invite the CEO to come to a meeting, the CEO might say that he's very busy and has no time and that he trusts the team, let's say. But really, escalating the dispute can be key for untangling the negotiation or the mediation. And if there is a process, if there is a clause that says that the dispute has to be escalated internally within both organizations, then the internal team has an excuse to tell the higher rank officials or tell the CEO, and you have to come because here is the clause. You have no option. We are just following the rules. So this is something that a structured process adds that a direct negotiation, maybe you don't have that support. So mediation provides a structured procedure that allows each party to pay better attention to the other party's arguments and rationality as well. Many times, one party thinks that is understanding the other party's position, and there's a tendency as well to be over-optimistic. about the soundness of the position you are representing. And mediation gives a proper and structured space to test your position and to have an opportunity to really pay attention to the other party's position. If you
The
realize that you
mediator
have
may help reflect in that sense and to come in to translate and to challenge the party perhaps, and that may not be possible in direct negotiation. Yeah, thank you. And you also pointed out to the point of the structural aspect of anchoring it in contracts or who needs to be involved. And the ICSID mediation rules in Mediation Rule 20, paragraph 4, have actually a provision on that to really ensure that you get the right people to the table. And in practice, what we all have seen is that there is a mediation between the disputing parties, and then there might be a mediation within either the investor party or the states and the state entity. Thanks. And Amal, what are your thoughts on direct negotiation and mediation benefits?
So I completely agree with Eric's points. And actually, I think even when you don't have a pre-agreed mediation clause, institutions like ICSID can give a legitimacy to the process that, as Eric was saying, gives a foundation for either in-house counsel or, for example, states' claims authorities to go and gather the decision makers within the state in order to participate meaningfully in the process. So it's a guarantee that you don't have in direct negotiations. The other thing, when each party, when the interest or certainly the positions are balanced, the bargaining powers are balanced, sometimes there's a clash, and direct negotiation really doesn't get you beyond that. And as Eric was saying, having the third party objectively test each party's position can be really helpful and can unlock situations that the parties were quite discouraged about in terms of reaching an amicable settlement. And likewise, when you see some acrimony that has developed between certain state representatives and certain investor representatives throughout the making of the dispute, having the dispassionate intervention of a professional mediator can really help, because first of all, it will help involve more people than the individuals or the group of individuals on each side that are making the resolution impossible to happen. And again, as I was saying before, in those complex disputes, you don't always have in the direct negotiation all the stakeholders. So if you're in a scenario where you want a resolution that leads to some sort of long-term closure of the dispute, either through continuation of the business in country, or, as you say, withdrawal, but with long-term resolution without the risk of lingering claims that come back, and that's particularly for the states, because sometimes they think they have closed one issue, but then because there were other stakeholders that were not taken care of in that settlement or that even award, the overall dispute is not yet over.
Mm-hmm. And the long-term nature of the investment relationship, really, that may affect a multitude of people and, as you say, stakeholders that can be included in a process and perhaps considered a sustainable solution, if I may.
And that I find difficult to capture in direct negotiations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. So if we look at mediation, we need a party agreement. Mediation is voluntary and a party may leave the process at any time. So we call it like ongoing consent, right? You don't only agree at the beginning, but you agree throughout, and you may leave at any point. We had done, as I mentioned at the outset, the analysis of the treaty provisions, and we will update this paper later this fall, where we have identified 5 categories of mediation provisions. Sometimes mediation is mandatory, although that doesn't seem to be the overarching approach. There was an interesting discussion in Working Group 3 about 2 years ago on this. And sometimes mediation is available at any time, like in the EU free trade agreements. However, empirical data shows us from practice that most investment mediations are actually commenced either on a basis of a contractual provision or post-dispute agreement by the parties. Amal, start with you. What are sources of investment mediation consent that you've seen in practice?
Well, so your most common sources are the treaties, right? So many mediations and conciliations start with a provision in the treaty, a multi-tiered dispute resolution process in the treaty, and you have various types of multi-tiered processes, right? Some are, it's an optional resort to mediation or other forms of amicable resolution processes. Some are compulsory, and some modern treaties are actually. And I think during the first episode of this series, you've had some really interesting reviews of sort of what we can see in recent treaties. But I know that, for example, India has put in place a very robust multi-tiered process with first local exhaustion of local remedies, then compulsory alternative dispute resolution before you even get to arbitration. So I think a number of states are becoming cognizant of the opportunity that can present itself with these multi-tiered clauses. And as Eric was saying earlier, it's also it gives you the opportunity to not be the one starting the mediation or asking for a mediation, because somehow people can perceive that as a position of weakness. But the reality is, mediation is a flexible process, and the agreement to mediate is equally flexible. So while it is not easy to get there when you don't have some existing provision in the treaty or investment contract, so some investment contracts also include the same type of multi-tiered processes. Some framework agreements with state-owned entities have that as well. So that's what we see.
Okay. Eric, do you have anything to add in terms of sources that you see in practice?
Well, in line with what Amal has said, despite the fact that many times a multi-tier dispute resolution clause is not available, I would say that it's much better to have one than to leave it to the parties to consider when a dispute arises. Designing a process when there is a dispute has several burdens, and that can be avoided by thinking about a structured process beforehand. Many public officers fear being questioned for the decision they take, and a party may fear being perceived as having a weak case if it proposes a mediation, in line with what Amal has said. So having mediation as a step parties need to take before escalating the dispute releases the parties from these burdens and allows them to blame the clause for having to try mediation, let's say. In my experience, having a prescriptive clause, especially in the public sphere, is better than just a general clause. For example, a clause that mandates meetings between high-ranking managers and officials, setting up the specific time periods, requires written exchanges of positions, and necessitates verbal presentations of these positions, among other requirements, is much better than just saying that that parties have to try mediation. So framing the process reduces the need to rely on the proactivity of the parties.
And to have that. So we at ICSID, when we receive a request for arbitration in our registration notices and the correspondence, we remind the parties that mediation remains an option under the ICSID auspices, and also provide that in the draft procedural order. We have heard that it sometimes helps parties for this proactivity that you mentioned to come from outside, such as an institution. So if each of you has 5 points that you have in mind for recommending, when do you recommend mediation to a party that you represent? What are up to 5 points that you consider? Eric, do you want to start?
Well, to consider mediation, I would say that it's always an option. Always consider mediation. There's nothing you will lose by considering it. And there's a lot you can lose if you don't consider it. There are safe ways to approach it in terms of not having to release confidential information unnecessarily, and really understanding the interest underlying the dispute are key. That's something that you will not have the possibility to explore when you are in the dispute, in the formal arbitration, because then the discussion will be only around the positions that have to be solved. And something else is that it's an opportunity for the parties to engage with their own dispute. This is, for me, the key for settling any type of dispute. The parties need to be involved in their own dispute. When an arbitration starts, especially a large and complex international arbitration, the process is so complex that in-house teams rely too much and delegate too much responsibility in external counsel. So they are not engaged as much as they could in their own dispute. Mediation is an assisted negotiation process where the client, the investor, and the state are in the driving seat. So seize that opportunity while it's available, because maybe later on the client itself will not be in the driving seat.
Thank you, Eric, sharing from your insights on both sides. And would you think that it should be recommended early or late? What is your temporal scope on mediation recommendations?
For me, it will be always. Keep it always open. As early as possible is better, because the relationship is still not that damaged, not that tense. So seize that opportunity. And an additional point, very important, I think, is to propose negotiation to the other party, not to the other party's counsel. Because the possibility to negotiate resonates very much for commercial people and for politicians, let's say, or for public officers themselves. They are the ones that are afraid of not being able to achieve the interest they are looking for. When you propose it to the council is focused on winning a claim, or well, basically the council doesn't know the interest underlying the dispute. So if the proposal is directed to the counterparty itself, there is an increased likeliness of receiving a positive response.
Amal, do you want to react to that and also share your considerations for aspects that lead you to recommend mediation?
Yeah, I think there is a due diligence that counsel needs to make on their own client. And so, as Eric said, understanding the big picture for your client is really important. Some clients really need an award, for example, for a variety of strategic reasons, whether they're states or investors, right? So you need to understand that, so that you understand whether you are at a stage where mediation is a good recommendation to make, to possibly test with your client. Is it really the case that they have to get to the award stage or partial award stage before they try to engage in amicable discussions? So understanding your client, but also understanding the other side. Are you dealing with another side that actually has an organizational structure, as we will discuss later, that allows them to meaningfully engage? Otherwise, you're just essentially wasting your client's money on a process that it does not have a meaningful chance of succeeding. So that's one point. The stage at which you're going to propose mediation is important. Sometimes if you need interim measures, for example, quickly, you may not want to wait for mediation process to start, and maybe you need to get there before you even start mediation. So there are many factors that control when you can recommend mediation to your client. So, a change in government, you can have a change in government that can be an opportunity for that. And again, that's all a matter of, opportunity, and the opportunity is really assessed. Again, I really like Eric's framing of what are the overarching interests at issue, because you can't just base your analysis of whether to go to mediation on the substantive rights that are at issue in the dispute. It's beyond that. So I think one reservation I would have on recommending mediation is when you know that there are, for example, corruption issues. I think it's really tricky when you are dealing with a dishonest or a party that you suspect may have engaged in corruptive practices from either side. I think it's tricky to recommend mediation in those cases. I'm not saying that it's always a no, but certainly that's a big reservation.
Willingness to negotiate is the cornerstone,
yes,
and
exactly.
if you do not wish to do that, regardless of like the whole setting. Yeah, it's interesting. I just want to point out that neither of you identified that mediation only applies to a specific region or only applies to a particular industry sector, but rather that you need to look at this. Amal, you have a reaction?
Yes, I actually would like, sorry, I did want to react on that, because I actually think that for investor state mediation, I don't know that the culture is as important as in commercial mediation, because I think the factors in investor state mediation go more to the institutional framework that exists or not, both within the investor or the state, than really a culture of mediation.
Okay, thank you. Amal, we stay with you. What are concerns that you have heard about mediation, and how can counsel engage with that? Maybe if you can give us your 2 minutes on that.
Yeah, look, I think that there is a distrust of mediation generally with clients who have not done it before. So when you have clients who have not done it before, or co-counsel who have not done it before, or opposing counsel who have not done it before, they have the feeling that once the parties have positions that are too far apart from each other, there is no way to reconcile. The only way is a formal dispute. There is a mistrust in the ability of mediators to actually do that kind of job. It's a difficult job, and people are very uncertain about whether they can find the right person to do the job. So those are, concerns of, okay, so it's going to be a waste of my time. There may be one more concern where counsel really needs to educate themselves and then educate their clients about it, is what are the risks for if the mediation fails? What am I giving up? And I think that that's an important conversation to have. You have default rules, mediation rules that cover that partially. You need to make sure that they are tailored to your dispute.
Yeah, and default rules that you can rely on, and engaging potentially with a mediator to address these concerns.
Exactly.
Eric, from your end, concerns that you have heard, and what can counsel do to overcome?
Well, parties in Latin America often consider that that a mediator will not be able to help settle if the parties themselves have not been able to do so. And this is because the mechanism is not very well known generally in the region, with some exceptions. There have been many bad experiences with mechanisms that appear to be like mediation, such as conciliation or something called amigable componedor in Spanish, because the techniques applied have not been suitable. Thus, there is a reluctance to try a mechanism that seems similar, missing the fact that we are really talking about a different one. So counsel have a significant role to play in helping their clients properly understand the mechanism, choosing the right mediators, and making the most out of it. You have one chance to do it. If you do it wrongly, then the impression will be that it's a waste of time and it will never work. But maybe it's because it was not done the proper way. In general, I would say that counsel often don't value ADR as an alternative for clients. In the region, generally, it's more like litigious, and counsels many times as well don't value ADR as a good business. That is something to consider.
We have you bring up the mediators. ICSID is happy to assist parties to identify people who have done investment mediation. The pool is developing, and mediation is not as public as arbitration, even though much information is out there. But we are happy to assist. So Amal, if I turn back to you, how does the role of a party representative differ in mediation from arbitration? How does the advocacy differently work?
Yeah, it's very different. Your role is to inform the mediator about what the interests of your clients are, and what they, where they would like to get, and really support your clients. The external counsel really takes a back seat in the mediator and in the mediation, and really tries to enable the clients. It's a situation where you have to balance out the fact that you always have to watch out for your clients' rights and make sure that they're not compromising anything in case the mediation fails, but at the same time not being that fierce advocate that we are asked to be in the context of an arbitration, but really be open to having your client go to ex parte meetings with the mediator, for example, without you, and then report back to you. To do a client to client, investor client to state client meetings with the mediators without counsel. And it takes some, you need to switch your mindset as counsel.
It requires an equally different skill set in some ways, right? While your legal hat is certainly still in the closet, if you will. It's still around for assessing negotiation strategies and approaches. Eric, your thoughts on this?
I fully agree with what Amal has said, and in line with what I mentioned before as well. I see that the trend in arbitration is that the parties back off and external counsel takes control of the process. And this can even lead to a disengagement of the parties team, who may feel that the process is too complicated. So in this context, counsel needs to help their client to take the lead during the mediation, empower them to be proactive, think outside the box of the dispute, and have a proper understanding of what to expect and not to expect. This is difficult because many times the comfort zone for clients is to be on the back seat, and now they are outside of their comfort zone. They are leading. They are the ones who know their red lines, what they can compromise for, and this is something that the external counsel needs to know how to frame properly and empower the client to put forward. Now, counsel is also playing a very important role protecting the client from not sharing information that could compromise their position in arbitration, even though mediation is a confidential process and without prejudice. There's no need to overshare information. So that line is something that the counsel probably is more aware of what needs really to be shared and what can be not so necessary. Then counsel also shall provide a realistic assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of his client position to be able to consider different settlement scenarios. This is key because the realistic assessment is what is going to provide the red lines for the negotiation. So if the assessment is too optimistic or too pessimistic, then the negotiation strategy could be flawed.
And these are all concerns that can be discussed with the mediators. In one of our next webinars, we will have a discussion with mediators who will share success stories, and we will address the sharing of information and how to engage to help the parties deal with that very live issue. So to end our webinar series, I have one more question for each of you. Let's look at the bigger picture. What are organizational and perhaps legislative aspects or structures, we touched upon this earlier in the webinar, that can be put in place to enable mediation on both sides? And maybe Amal, we start with you.
Yeah, I think so. Very often the comment that you get about investor-state mediation or any type of negotiation with a state is that states will not engage because it puts at risk whomever, whatever civil servant is going to be conducting those talks, etc. I think the states who are doing it successfully are states who are organizing a structure, really an institutional framework for these talks with support from the highest levels of government. So the prime minister, the president. So, I like Egypt's example because Egypt has put in place that type of structure, and they're not the only ones, but they're one of the countries that are settling investor-state disputes because they have put together a structure where you have several ministers and the prime minister involved, and so that you don't have just a couple or a series of civil servants who are going to be exposed and will never meaningfully engage. So I think that's an important point. But people think that it's only a limitation that weighs on states. It's not. It also weighs on the investors. You also have. You also need a structure within the investors that really can meaningfully engage in these mediations or these direct negotiations so that it gets you somewhere. If you don't have that type of structure, unfortunately, I think the process cannot properly succeed, and it becomes like an information gathering exercise from each party for a later dispute, full-blown dispute, and that's not certainly that's not the objective.
If it's conducted that way. Yeah. Eric, your thoughts on this part?
I fully agree with what Amal has indicated, and I agree that defining a proper process beforehand, which forces the parties to follow the tiers complying with requirements, sharing the responsibility and accountability among several officers is key. Causing the production of internal cost-benefit analysis reports and paying attention to their other parties' position is the right way to increase the likelihood of settlement, in particular in the public sphere, because fear is a great concern when engaging in direct negotiations by states.
And it's interesting how you both point out that the structural and organizational aspects on the state side may not be that different from this investor structure of a project vehicle and parent company and who all gets involved in the decision making. We have been working with some of our member states and the World Bank colleagues to look at organizational structures in that respect and to anchor it really in that point. One aspect that you both touched upon a little bit is the government official involved in the mediation, and just to untangle that a little. On the one hand, the agreement to mediate, explore settlement, and on the other hand, the process to conclude a settlement. And this is really interesting, which we will feature down the road in our webinar series, how mediators have assisted parties during the settlement negotiation of coming up with procedures to spread that political responsibility and address in that sense what are processes that need to go. Amal mentioned the cabinet of ministers or highest ranking other government offices, and I know, Eric, in Peru you have a whole institutional setup on that, or whether this goes to the Government Accountability Office, the Attorney General's office, or a court even. We will have a feature, a mediation where there was a court approval of the settlement. So just these are the more creative ways that are being explored to look at that. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. One goes to the mediator qualifications, and I would refer you to the ICSID background paper and to the UNCITRAL guidelines on investment mediation, which set out a little bit in more detail than we touched upon on qualifications that can be considered. Another question related to the disclosure of information from mediation in arbitration. And we have there the rule that Amal and Eric both pointed to that relates to the use of information in other proceedings. So that's inadmissible. This is in fact in arbitration. This is in fact a concept that is in ICSID Convention Article 35 anchored as well. The difficulty that we discussed before is the enforcement of this. Amal, did you had a thought on this while we were discussing the webinar? You want to say?
Yes, it's a tricky point, and I think that's where your lawyer hat comes back on in the context of the mediation, because you don't, you know, if the mediation fails, you get to a document production process in the arbitration, and you do not want the mediation to be a cause for weakening your position in any process in the arbitration. And so I think it is important, you know, when you are in a mediation to really reaffirm that mediation is not arbitration, that you should not need the same types of document production as you would have in an arbitration, because that's not why the parties are there. If the parties are not willing to do the mediation, they should stop immediately, stop wasting their resources, and go to arbitration. But I think that's where counsel's role is a more of a defensive of their client's role in the mediation, because the sharing of information, even though you have both, you know, you have Rule 11 in the ICSID mediation rules, and then you have, of course, Rule 35 in the ICSID convention. Even though you have those protections, I'm always extremely wary to say that you can just speak entirely free. It's different when you are in your conversations with the mediators. I think that, and I think it's not and I'm sure you're going to address that in your next episodes. It's not a matter of convincing the mediator. It's a matter of exchanging with the mediator so that they can properly, weigh the interests of your clients and really make the mediation progress in an effective way. And that's different. But what you share in the common sessions, I think that I would say you need to be as careful as in any context with the counterpart.
You're a guardian in that sense. Yeah. Eric, do you have thoughts on that?
Yes. My starting point is that in principle, you could conduct a mediation sharing very little information about the position or the supporting documents or supporting arguments for your position in an arbitration. Why? Because you are focusing on the interest, on the underlying interest, and you're trying to walk around the dispute rather than to solve the dispute. So you could just bypass the dispute itself, right? And try to find how to work with the other interest. So in principle, you could avoid discussing the details of the dispute itself. And that's more useful than just focusing one day on discussing the dispute. Despite that, your position has to be reasonable, and you have to provide support for what you're saying. So if you are saying, I need the compensation for 100 million, then the other party needs to understand why 100 million, why not 80, why not 50? And for that, you need to provide certain explanation to the extent that is necessary. And here, it's the art of negotiation. What you need to really disclose to convince the other party that you are not just bluffing. And that's that could be the tricky part, but also you are gaining reality in relation to your dispute, because if you are not able to show why 100 million, maybe you don't have a case, or maybe your case is not as strong as you thought.
The art of negotiating. I think that is the concluding remark, Eric. Thank you so much. Thank you both for sharing your insights on investment mediation, the role of counsel, the differences, arbitration, negotiation, and mediation. And it concludes our webinar series. And I hope to all of our audience that you found it as informative as I thought today went. And I invite everyone to join us on our next webinar series. We will have a block of 3 episodes coming up on success stories in investment mediation. One will be a discussion with mediators, sharing from their experience. And then we have 2 webinars, each focusing on a recap of an investment mediation where the parties and the mediator will reflect on their experience. Tune in on November 19, December 3, and December 10, and we look forward to welcoming you back. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.